The power of unblending in IFS therapy. A few weeks ago, I attended a workshop that was geared towards women. As we introduced ourselves, I spoke for the part of me that was nervous about being vulnerable in a group of all women. This part was worried that I might be excluded, judged, or somehow not feminine enough. Instead of caretaking me or reassuring me that this group would be different, the leader encouraged me to look at the story I was telling myself by continuing to let this part lead. She suggested that I disconnect from this belief so that I could be open enough to allow this experience to stand on its own, apart from my past. She shared an example from her own life. For many years, she'd told herself, "I'm broke." This negative mentality had dominated her ability to engage in certain aspects of her life. She couldn't afford to take trainings or buy some of the things she needed. One day, when a number of her colleagues were signing up for a coveted workshop, the refrain had come up again. "I'd love to, but I'm broke," she said out loud. A friend reflected back to her, "Hey, that's one heck of a mantra you're repeating." This provocative nudge from her friend precipitated an aha moment and clued her in that she might be blended with a part that was holding some strong beliefs about money. She then began to explore and heal the underpinnings of this internal dynamic. For myself, after listening to her story, I was able to make room and turn towards the part inside of me that was so afraid around women. To be tender towards it, to understand and acknowledge that it had really been hurt and it was legitimately scared. With this small piece of inner work, I was able to find more space inside, to unblend from the constellation of parts that would regularly take over for me in this kind of group. In a few breaths, I was able to feel present and connected to the group around me. In the end, I had a deeply positive experience. Time and again, life gives us the opportunity to notice when we're blended with a belief, a story, a part, or cluster of parts. It seems that no matter how much I work with my own system, I continue to learn about unblending from my parts. Without knowing about it, my experience with this group of women would have followed my old narrative. I don't belong here, which was informed by an exile who feels alone and uncared for. Though it's not always easy for ourselves or our clients to gain perspective in the moment, unblending enables us to rebuild, reshape, relearn, and begin to trust ourselves in the world. It does not yet appear in the dictionary. Unblending is an IFS term, and it refers to the internal pause that gives us the ability to acknowledge there's a part present and to be with it instead of from it. The concept to blend and unblend as referring to our inner parts has been one of the most helpful tools for me as a human and as an IFS therapist. When we are blended with a part, we experience the part's reality as though it's the only truth. For example, when we're in a deep depression, the pit of despair, it seems that no other reality exists. Depression is so blended with us that it can almost feel unbearable. It's as though the part puts blinders on our vision of the world and disallows the existence of other experiences or realities. With this, I've found that there's two basic components to unblending: pause and turn towards. There's that first pause when you notice a part is overwhelming you or even dominating your narrative, and sometimes your physical body. The second step is turning towards the part, ideally from self. With certain parts, finding that pause is more challenging. This is especially true with parts that are more somatic, parts that activate the sympathetic nervous system, parts that have a strong emotional charge, or parts that are routinely activated by certain people or situations. For myself, I have a couple of questions that I like to ask inside that allows me to pause and turn towards the blended parts. I ask initially, what part is here? Or sometimes, who is here? And I take some time to identify it, how it feels, what's happening in my body. Is it affecting the way I'm breathing? Who is this part? Can I give it a name? Once I find the part, I ask the part itself what it's worried about. Is there something about the situation or something that just happened that brought the part up? It'll usually let you know. And then thirdly, I love to ask what the part needs from me right now. Quite often it's in the moment just acknowledgement that it's there. These questions are a guide that kind of works for me, but everyone has the ability to find out what works best to unblend their own blended parts. If you notice that a part is present or overwhelming you, play around with it the next time you find yourself blended. You'll find your own type of inquiry that allows you to pause and turn towards your part. I find it's best to keep it simple and tender, to use your own language for being with your parts. Explore it, see what feels right. Sometimes you need to sit down and close your eyes, especially as you're learning, but also anytime a part begins to overwhelm you. Also, the trust that develops in your own system as you gently pause and turn inside. That trust will enhance deeper work with exiles and the trauma that they hold down the line. So what we know in IFS therapy is that parts of ourselves don't blend without a reason. When parts are really blended in the extreme and it's hard to get space inside, it's a clear indication that deeper things are happening for the system than what's going on at the moment externally. Our blended parts are incredible indicators of internal work that wants to happen. A message from the inner self to shine a light on something that hasn't yet been truly understood or witnessed. If the parts felt safe, then they wouldn't need to blend so thoroughly. If we find that we have parts that are dominating ourselves or our clients, we can try our best to meet them with compassion and curiosity. It's important to remember that these parts are here to protect us and not to harm us. They have a lot to teach us about ourselves and our system, and they're guides for healing. So when we think about our clients being blended, one of our roles that we embody as IFS therapists is to be parts detectors. It can be really obvious when a client is blended with certain parts, like a sad one or an angry part. But when a client is blended with a more familiar narrator or amiable people-pleasing part, our work becomes a little bit more nuanced. Teaching our clients to unblend in the moment, as well as outside of the therapy office, can be delicate work. We're essentially asking a worried protector to give the client space when it's not actually feeling safe. Luckily, the IFS model has given us an excellent tool for assisting our clients in unblending. Once a part has been identified, we ask our clients this magical question: how do they feel towards this part? this question in particular creates room for that two-step unblending process. It creates the pause, and it quickly puts the client in the seat of the self. The ability to turn towards and remember, oh, right, I'm not this part that feels so strong. How do I feel towards it? Challenge is going to rise with this when our clients have parts with strong feelings about the part that's currently being explored. For example, when you ask, how do you feel towards this part? Another part will answer. Once the second part has had its say, it's important to come back to the initial question. How do you feel towards it? Again and again, we'll ask this question until one of the qualities of self will answer. I'm feeling calm, I'm feeling compassionate. Sometimes you won't get a clear quality of self in the client's words, but you'll feel as a therapist, your own parts detectors will feel that the client has enough self-energy towards the part. So just in this simple question, how do you feel towards it? You can guide the client to create the space inside to be with their part unblended. It's from this place that the part is finally able to be understood. From here, you can ask the part about its fears and its history. It's always good to have a story to understand these concepts. And I have a client story that can help illustrate this concept of unblending. So I was working with a young woman with severe lifelong rheumatoid arthritis. She's starting a business and was having trouble with one of her family members. The family member was supporting her financially in getting the business off the ground, but was putting a lot of pressure by kind of micromanaging the client, asking where she was all the time and making suggestions. She was trying to be helpful, but the pressure would bring up this really dissociated, unmotivated part in the client. The client's dissociated, unmotivated part would distract her sometimes all day, and it felt as though it would keep her from succeeding. So we worked with this part in session a few times, and sometimes the dissociation would get so blended that it was hard for her to get space inside. And when I tried to talk to the part directly as a therapist and ask it what its job was, it would actually make this client dizzy and uncomfortable. So one day recently, the part was blended and the client was having a tough morning because of it. There wasn't as much frustration towards the part, towards the dissociation. For some reason, this particular day, the client had a little bit more space. And when we asked how she felt towards it, there was some curiosity. So the part, when it had space, let her know that it was afraid that if she did too much, that bad things would happen. And so it was trying to keep her from overdoing it. When we asked this part about its history, it shared that when she was diagnosed with the rheumatoid arthritis as a young girl, her doctors told her that if she did too much, she'd end up in a wheelchair. A terrifying and really unmanageable stress for an 8-year-old girl already in so much pain. The part that had been trying to keep that from happening for over 20 years, it let her know that it was holding her back to keep her from ending up in a wheelchair. And it had felt that it had needed to blend with her to keep her healthy and safe. So, though the family member was trying to be supportive, she ended up triggering this really deep fear and getting this part to activate and keep her from overdoing it. So these triggered parts led this client to understanding her system more clearly. And so she worked with that exile, that 8-year-old girl that was holding all that fear and worry, and witnessed for her what it was like to have had that diagnosis so young. So sometimes when you blend with exiles, it's different than blending with protectors. So for this client, she blended with the protector that was dissociating her, but then when she met with the exile, there's potential there for blending with that exile's experience and emotion too. That didn't happen in this particular session, but it can happen often. And blending with exiles can feel really different than being blended with protectors. The core beliefs that exiles hold can feel more true when exiles are blended. So we can get back to that place where we feel that nobody loves me, or I could be hurt, I'm not safe, I'm not worthy, or I might die from this loneliness or this feeling. When we're blended with these exiles, us or our clients feel some of the original pain that they felt when they experienced the trauma that created that belief. This can feel incredibly overwhelming and sometimes bring up other parts that are hopeless and believe that it will never get better. Asking exile parts to unblend and give the client space so that they can truly be witnessed is an important part of the healing process. But exiles have often received the message that they're too much. So remembering that an exile is a younger wounded part and really taking the time to sensitize to that shift in energy in the client is really important as a therapist. So this young part has injuries and pain specific to their own experience and needs extra sensitivity and confidence. So knowing when a client is blended with an exile, and just knowing that there's a child in the room and really orienting towards that younger space. And that child may be in their 20s or 30s, depending on when the traumatic experience happened, but really sensitizing to making sure that the client can be with the exile from a place of self without bringing any shame to that exile. So before asking the exile to unblend, it's really helpful to check with our own system. How am I feeling towards this client's exile? Do I have parts present? Do I get scared, or do I feel more responsible when the exile is here? Sometimes this will show up as just a little bit of tension in our body. Holding confidence and compassion for the exile is important. This part needs to be fully witnessed and understood. So I've found that sometimes the exile actually needs to blend with the client in order to truly be felt, especially if the trauma that the exile is holding was pre-verbal or hard to articulate with words. So if you feel this is the case, you can actually ask the client's permission for the exile to blend. So I like to ask, is it okay for you to feel this now? Are you all right with what's happening? And then you can continue to make sure that the exile feels the different experience of having self there. The exile may be expressing a lot of emotion, but you can gently ask, can he feel you there as he shows you all of this? Does he feel like you're getting it? Is there more that this little boy wants to show you or let you feel? Giving exiles the permission to be in the state that they are while being witnessed by the self allows them to attach to us and trust us more. Usually, as this happens, they naturally unblend, communicate more clearly, and shift into a more healed version of themselves. It's a beautiful process. So once we learn and can teach our clients the power of unblending, we'll be able to navigate aspects of our life, relationships, and challenges from this place with more access to self. My own opportunity to heal some of the pain that I had experienced from being excluded by groups of females arose with my blended parts. They gave me a gift, the opportunity to integrate what had happened to me. The teacher who asked me to question the old pain story, she actually invited me to heal. And instead of moving back into that disconnected, nervous place that my parts were afraid of, they got a chance to be seen in how bad their experience had actually been. This felt really good for the parts of me that carried the wounds and the story. So when we track our parts in blending and unblending with some awareness, life will give us the opportunity to experience them again and again until we really learn what our internal systems need. And so the goal is to sort of eventually meet our blended parts, whatever they are: anger, frustration, deep depression, anxiety, a panic. We can meet them with welcome and intrigue. So if you want to learn more about internal family systems therapy and the unblending process, please join me and my partner David Kitchings in this upcoming workshop that we'll be doing with Life Architect. Thanks so much for listening.